On July 1st, 1916, the British Army lost 57,470 men in a single morning. Not a campaign, not a month, one morning. Now here's what nobody tells you about that number. Those men didn't fall from different corners of Britain. They fell from the same streets, the same towns, some of them from the same front door. And the reason for that goes back to a decision made 2 years earlier, a decision that seemed at the time like the greatest idea anyone had ever had. In August 1914, Britain had a serious problem. When the war broke out, the British Army had around 250,000 professional soldiers. That sounds like a lot, until you learn that France had 4 million underarms and Germany had 3.8 million. Britain had 250,000 men, already stretched thin across an empire that reached from India to Africa. Lord Kitchener, the Secretary of State for War, knew the numbers did not add up. He needed more men, fast, 500,000 at a minimum. And the problem was, Britain did not have a draft. No conscription, no law that said you had to fight. If you wanted men, you had to convince them to choose it. So his face went on the most famous poster in British history. Pointing finger, stern eyes, your country needs you. It was everywhere. On walls, on buses, in newspapers, and it worked, to a point. Men signed up by the tens of thousands, but Kitchener needed hundreds of thousands more. And recruiting officers quickly figured out something uncomfortable. It is very hard to convince a man to walk into a war alone. That's when a man named Lord Derby had an idea. It was August 19th, 1914. Derby was in Liverpool, watching young men shuffle past the recruiting office with their hands in their pockets. Some looked in, most kept walking, and he thought, what if you did not have to go alone? What if you could sign up with your mates? The pitch was simple. Sign your name and bring your friends. You will train together, ship out together, serve together. The Army gives you its word. You will not be split up. You fight as a unit with the men you know. Within 48 hours, Liverpool had its first Pals Battalion, 1,500 men, not from across the country, but from the same city, the same streets, the same pubs. The Liverpool Pals. The idea spread like fire. What happened next is one of the most extraordinary things in British history. Groups of men started showing up at recruiting offices together, not as individuals, but as ready-made units. Factory workers from Lancashire, miners from Yorkshire, bank clerks from London, footballers, cricketers, church congregations. In Sheffield, 1,000 men signed up in a single day. In Accrington, a small mill town in Lancashire, with a population around 45,000, 1,100 men volunteered in just 10 days. They became the Accrington Pals, the 11th Battalion, East Lancashire Regiment. These were cotton mill workers, men who had spent their whole lives in the same town, gone to the same schools, married women from the same streets. Now they were soldiers, together. Across Britain, over 300 Pals battalions formed within months. There was the Stockbrokers Battalion, men from the City of London in pinstripe suits learning to fire rifles. The Sportsmen's Battalion, filled with athletes and ex-hunters. The Public Schools Battalion, even a battalion made up entirely of footballers. By the end of 1914, 1 million men had volunteered, the largest volunteer army in history. And not one of them really understood what they were walking into. Through 1914 and most of 1915, the Pals trained on the fields and moors of Britain. Officers drilled them in formations. They learned to march, to dig, to follow orders. Their families came to watch on weekends. Mothers packed lunches. Children ran along the fences. The mood was almost festive. The newspapers said the war would be over by Christmas, then by Easter, then by the following Christmas. The men believed it, most of them anyway. A quick campaign, a decisive victory, home in time for Sunday dinner. In December 1915, the Pals shipped out to France. And for the first time, they saw what the war actually looked like. 450 miles of trenches stretched from the English Channel to the Swiss border. Mud that swallowed men whole. The sound of shells that never stopped. Not during the day, not at night. The smell of things that had no name. But they were still together. That part, at least, was true. The men of Accrington were still standing next to the men they had grown up with, and that counted for something. By the summer of 1916, British commanders had a plan, a big one, the Somme, a wide, flat stretch of land in northern France held by heavily fortified German lines. The plan was to break through, to punch a hole so large that the cavalry could pour through and end the war in a single stroke. But first, the artillery. For 7 straight days, June 24th to July 1st, British guns fired 1.5 million shells at the German lines. The noise could be heard from the south coast of England. The ground shook for miles. The commanders were certain it had worked. One officer told his men the night before the attack that they would not even need their rifles. He promised the Germans would all be dead and that they would just walk across and take the position. The men believed him. There was one thing nobody admitted knowing. The German soldiers had spent months building bunkers underground. Not shallow holes, full concrete shelters, some 12 meters deep enough to survive a week of shelling. When the British guns finally stopped on the morning of July 1st, the Germans came up out of the ground, set up their machine guns, and waited. At 7:28 in the morning, the whistles blew. All along the British lines, men climbed out of the trenches and walked forward. Walked because that was the order. Walk in straight lines. Keep formation. The ground ahead is clear. It was not clear. The German machine guns opened almost immediately. Maxim guns were capable of firing 600 rounds per minute. The British soldiers were walking across open ground in broad daylight, in straight lines, toward men who had been waiting for them. The Accrington Pals went over the top at 7:28. Within 30 minutes, 235 of the 584 men who had gone over were dead. Another 350 were wounded. Of the entire battalion, only 136 men came back unharmed. 32 minutes. That is all it took. The Sheffield City Battalion lost 513 men that same morning. The Leeds Pals, the Barnsley Pals, the Bradford Pals. Battalion after battalion from the same towns were cut down in the same fields within the same hour. By the end of July 1st, the British Army had suffered 57,470 casualties. 19,240 of them were dead. More British soldiers died that morning than the United States lost on D-Day across all of Normandy. And because of the PALS system, the losses were not spread across the country. They were concentrated, street by street, town by town. The news reached Accrington on July 3rd, 2 days after the battle. The mayor received the first telegram. Then the family started getting theirs. People described women lining up outside the post office and the telegraph office waiting for names, standing in queues in the summer heat, not knowing if the piece of paper they were about to receive would end their world or spare it. On some streets, every house had its curtains drawn by the end of the week. The cotton mills went silent. Shops closed. There was nothing to say. In a town of 45,000 people, almost every family had lost someone, and because these men had all gone together, the grief hit all at once. It didn't trickle in. It arrived like a wall. Historians call what happened to these towns concentrated community grief. It's what happens when loss isn't spread out, when an entire generation disappears from the same place at the same time. Some towns in Yorkshire and Lancashire lost between 20 and 30% of their male population between the ages of 18 and 40, not over the course of the war, on one morning. The British government never stood up and said the PALS system was a mistake. No official statement, no formal apology, no public reckoning. But quietly, through 1916 and into 1917, the policy of keeping local men together in the same units was abandoned. Nobody wanted to risk it again. In Accrington today, the War Memorial stands in the town center. It carries 865 names. Most of them died on the Somme. Walk down the columns and you'll see the same surnames, repeated brothers, fathers, cousins. Listed one after another. They enlisted together, they trained together, they went over the top together, and the town spent the next generation trying to figure out how to carry on without them. Every week we uncover a war the world forgot. Subscribe so you never miss a forgotten story. Let us know in the comments. Had you ever heard of the Pals Battalions before, or is there another forgotten story from history we should cover next?